So they're also being used then to promote compassion assistance to post-abortive women. So these new ideas now are adding up to a new strategy of working to make abortion unthinkable, or at least very rare. It's a long-term plan. It's not an all or nothing plan, but a plan to make changes where possible, based on what's realistically achievable. So then, working to change this culture means taking this message to every walk of life, to every profession, to everywhere that we go. Every conversation we have must be about building a new culture of life. And working to create such a big cultural change in thinking means more than just marching or lobbying politicians, although of course there's a time and a place for that too. But it really means that we need to change to become the people of life and love, and that we need to be transformed. In the final Mass at Randwick for World Youth Day, Pope Benedict reminded us that the power of love can indeed create a new world. It can renew the face of the earth. He spoke especially to young people such as you when he said, "Empowered by the Spirit and drawing upon faith's rich vision, a new generation of Christians is being called to help build a world in which God's gift of life is welcomed, respected and cherished, not rejected, feared as a threat and destroyed. A new age in which love is not greedy or self-seeking, but pure and faithful, genuinely free, open to others, respectful of their dignity, seeking their good, radiating joy and beauty. An age in which hope liberates us from shallowness, apathy and self-absorption, which deaden our souls and poison our relationships. Dear young friends, the Lord is asking you to be prophets of this new age, messengers of love, drawing people to the Father and building a future of hope for all of humanity." So where might we go from World Youth Day and from these defeats we've recently suffered? John Paul II again says one of the great tasks of the pro-life movement is to draw society into a deeper reflection about the mystery, wonder and value of human life. We need to foster in ourselves, he says, a contemplative outlook. We need to reflect and to pray, especially at times like this, where we've won one vote on euthanasia but lost the vote on abortion. We need to ask why. Was there anything else we could have done? Was there anything else we could have done to win over those last 3 votes in the upper house? What will all this mean? What, if any, positives can we draw out of this? And what are the negatives? What is stopping people from joining the pro-life movement? How many have been wounded by abortion and the culture of death? How deeply have they been wounded by the sexual revolution? How then can we help them to heal? How can we bring them the healing love of God? While we're still pondering the implications of this recent legislation, we can say that we have had de facto abortion for almost 40 years in Victoria, and we have now made it official. The biggest change is that doctors, nurses, pharmacists and psychologists now could be compelled by this new law to act against their own conscience and wishes and to become involved in an abortion or in referral for abortion. So in contemplating all this, we need to turn once again to Christ, our love and our hope. Our life and our hope. John Paul II reminds us that some evils can only be driven out by prayer and by fasting. We need to renew our efforts, to ponder and ask some hard questions about what we can learn from this and what we might all do better in the future. How might we build on the new networks we've just built? How can we work to support vulnerable women and children? So I think, like the first Christians, we're being called to transform the world through love. Abortion is not a new problem for Christians. There's some evidence that abortion and female infanticide were widely practiced by the pagan Greeks and Romans, in the first few centuries. In a fascinating book called The Rise of Christianity, How the Obscure Marginal Jesus Movement Became the Dominant Religious Force in the Western World in a Few Centuries, a sociologist, not a Catholic, called Rodney Stark, argues that infanticide and abortion were widespread in the pagan culture at the time. Abortion, he says, not only resulted in the deaths of many women, but reduced the fertility of the women who survived. Interestingly, he says that the very high rates of abortion in the Greek and Roman world can only be understood if we recognise that in perhaps the majority of those cases it was the men, rather than the women, who made the decision to abort. On the other hand, the Christian subculture of the time was radically countercultural. Christians opposed abortion and female infanticide and allowed Christian women to marry at a much later age. Christian women then were protected from these pagan practices, and as a result, Christianity became attractive to women, he says. More women converted, and the increased status of women contributed to the rise of Christianity. It's a very interesting read, and I encourage all of you who are readers to get it out of the library at some stage. The main message from this is it appears that the first Christians changed their attitudes and the prevailing culture of their time through love. So in finishing tonight, I'd like to say, let us hope and pray too that we might be able to once again transform the world and that light will again overcome the darkness. Thank you all very much.
Marcia, sorry. Might open the floor up for questions. Before we do, just questions, no speeches, and encourage questions from young people, just about the young people.
Thanks very much, Marcia. I've just learned I just learned recently that between half and 2/3 of abortions are actually the result of failed contraceptives. It's seen by a lot of women and a lot of couples that in the event of failed contraception, abortion is a good backup. How do you actually counter that view that abortion is effectively a means of a backup in case of failed contraception? How do you actually counter that? Because I find that view quite difficult to rebut, if you like.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. That's a really good question. A lot of the women that we are working with through my office who've had abortions will tell us that many of them were taking contraception at the time and that it failed. And so I think this is part of this whole cultural thing that we're dealing with, that as a result of the sexual revolution, most people see, or a lot of people see contraception as a solution to abortion, whereas in fact we see it as part of the problem. And many women then might engage in sexual relationships that are much more likely where they're much more likely to be abandoned because they're not strong relationships. And so that contraception is actually setting them up for a big fall, which might be abortion, because they're not in a stable relationship. It's much more likely then that the people around them will insist on an abortion. And it is really hard to counter that in the world, but I think through time and as many women's stories are revealed and many women come forward to tell us their sad stories, that will start to change people's hearts and to see that this isn't actually the answer, it's actually part of the problem. If that makes some sense.